Good afternoon, good day, everyone. Welcome to the virtual roundtable entitled The U.S.-Canada Digital Economy, Powering Market Performance with Strategic Telco Partnerships, hosted by BCE Global USA. I'm Jamie Scotto-Kataya, CEO and founder of Jamie Scotto and Associates, your moderator for today. So welcome everybody, this virtual roundtable, hosted by BCE Global USA. So let's go ahead and take this from an investment and partnership standpoint. Canada offers US companies significant advantages. The key, however, is to unlock them. Today, we're excited. We're going to get the inside track on the art of making cross-border partnerships from Canadian and American top business leaders. So go ahead, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our featured panelists today. We have Hubert Bolduc, President of Invest Quebec, and Mr. Bob Nye, General Partner of JMI Equity. I'd like to turn the floor over to each of our featured panelists to give us a brief introduction of themselves and their company. Hubert, I'll start with you first.
Thank you, Jamie. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Hubert Bolduc. I'm the president of Investissement Québec International, which is the division of Investissement Québec. Invest Québec is the economic development agency of the Quebec's government, and I cover the international aspect, which I'll have more time to detail later today.
Thank you, Hubert. And Bob?
Thank you, Jamie. My name is Bob Nye. I'm one of the general partners with JMI Equity. We're one of the largest venture capital firms in North America. We manage over $6 billion and have been investing in Canada for over 20 years now. It's been a wonderful experience for us, so I'm always happy to chat about it.
Well, thanks, gentlemen, and that brings us right into it. We are going to now go ahead and take a deeper dive into our topic today, the U.S.-Canada digital economy, powering market performance with strategic telco partnerships. So first off, we're going to give the floor over to Hubert for his perspectives on the advantages that Canada offers to U.S. companies. Hubert?
Thank you. So as I've mentioned before, we are responsible for attracting foreign direct investments, helping Quebec companies export abroad, and also attracting talent into Quebec. I'll concentrate my thoughts on FDI. So why Quebec, and more generally why Canada, and why is this country and these regions important from a foreign direct investment, and why is it a destination for maybe some of you listening to us this afternoon? First of all, Quebec and Canada are free trade believers, and we have signed a free trade agreement with the USA and Mexico, a free trade with Europe, and a free trade agreement as well with Asian Pacific countries. So companies that decide to choose Quebec or Canada for furthering their expansion are not coming here because of an 8 million population in Quebec or 35 million in Canada. They're coming here because of a 1.5 billion consumers through free trade agreements, which represents roughly about 70% of the world GDP. They also choose Quebec and Canada for a very rich talent pool, lots of universities, and a very open immigration state in Quebec and country in Canada. And these are, I would say, the biggest drivers. There are others, and I'll go through them as I list some of the fields we're very good in. We're not good in everything, but we're very good in some of those fields. And one of them is definitely aerospace. After Toulouse and Seattle, Montreal is by far the third most important aerospace hub. Video games, probably number one and number three destination for video games. The biggest studio of video games in the world is based in Montreal, Ubisoft, which hires about 4,000 people. VFX, and some of the fields that are perhaps more in line with the discussion today, AI, data centers, and AI and data centers. And the reasons for that, again, is talent. And in terms of data centers, the key drivers are for sure the temperature. You don't need to cool off the data as much as in other space areas. Access to hydroelectricity. Quebec is 1 million lakes and rivers, and we are sitting on 44,000 renewable hydroelectricity megawatts. So it's definitely for data centers an interesting aspect. And the last one, and the most important one, is great fiber, and we have access here to very efficient fiber systems. So I'll finish here, and maybe we'll deep dive later, Jamie, on some of those sectors. But back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Hubert. Bob?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, we made our first investment over 20 years in Canada, and it's been, it's interesting. It felt kind of like a secret then. We made an investment business in Toronto called CompuWare, and there was less competition. We invest in enterprise software companies, and there hadn't been as much of that. And since then, we've made 15 investments, almost $1 billion of invested capital. This year alone, we'll have 3 companies. It's not terminology we use, but 3 unicorns in Canada. And it's just been incredibly successful. And so, the unfortunate thing for us, the great thing for Canada is when that happens, and we're not alone now. So there's been incredible capital flight into Canada, great venture growth. There's billions and billions and billions of dollars invested every year. I was looking up the stats, over 20 billion over the past 7 years. And that creates big businesses. And what's great is then those folks come out and want to start their own businesses again. And you start to get an ecosystem. And that didn't exist as much 2-3 decades ago, and it does now. So I don't really think of it as an emerging thing now. If you go find a great software company in Canada to invest in, you'll be competing against all the best software investors in the world. There's not, at this point, I think the border's wide open. It's a wonderful place to do business. I think from a partnering with entrepreneurs perspective, the integrity, the values, I realize they're different cultures, but the comfort and ease with which we're able to operate together, I think, is very high. And then the talent. I think the number one thing, Hubert discussed it in different areas, different specialty areas. But at this point, it's become pretty ubiquitous. There's phenomenal technical talent in Canada. Historically, there was less sales and marketing talent, more be great products, great technical products, and needed some help bringing them to the United States and other markets. That's also starting to change. That was a lot of the original capital had that thesis. At this point, there's great executives all over Canada, but it's been absolutely wonderful. And if we see a business in Canada, that's a plus from our perspective, for sure.
Oh, interesting. And, perhaps speaking myopically from an American perspective here, but, we think Canada, we're thinking Vancouver, Quebec, Calgary, Toronto. Are you seeing any opportunities for investment in areas outside of Canada's hottest cities?
Well, Hubert will have good perspective on this. We've invested in all of those provinces you just described. So, our first investments were in Toronto in the 90s. I've personally done investments in Vancouver and Calgary, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. The world's flat, it turns out. But I think the big thing that has changed is the amount of technical talent. I mean, great computer science folks were coming out of very few universities 20 and 30 years ago. Waterloo, now they're everywhere. Canadian universities are producing phenomenal talent all over the country. The same thing that's happened in the United States, same exact phenomenon. So if you're an entrepreneur, building a business in downtown Toronto versus building a business in Edmonton, that's an interesting decision, right? Loyalty, obviously the pandemic's changed the virtual environment. We as panelists were chatting about this prior. I think it's a lot easier now. So I think you're only going to see more of it.
If I can add to what Bob just said, Jamie, we used to say that talent followed investments, but what we're seeing today is that investments are following talent. So if you are the city or the state or the country that has sufficient talent, then you will win the race for FDI. So definitely, obviously I'm speaking more on behalf of Quebec, but I have to be honest, talent pools are quite incredible across Canada. And not only the local talent, but also talent coming from immigration. Immigration laws are around the world not perfect, but we feel that the ones we have here in Quebec and in Canada are quite accessible. And as a matter of fact, if you are a qualified worker, regardless of the religion, the skin, or the color of your skin, or where you come from, you can get work permits here in Canada in 14 days. So companies that come in and want to bring in their talent with them, the key strategic talent with them, they can have them sitting down at a desk, if that's still something we do, sitting down in front of a desk in an office these days, but they can have them in less than 2 weeks. So this is really a key driver as well.
14 days.
Hubert, our experience at the ground level with that has been exactly what you just described. I mean, our companies employ thousands and thousands of folks in Canada. But many of them will be U.S. folks who come over. Could be an executive, could be something else, and it's been seamless. I'm sure one of my folks is going to get upset at me because there has been an issue, and I'm going to now call you. But by and large, it's never been a problem, and many times when we're in other countries, it's a huge problem, and a real roadblock, and it's just been seamless at the ground level.
And 14 days just seems unheard of. So kudos to the way your government views your ability to get foreign workers feeling at home in Canada. And let's talk verticals, Hubert, because I know we had chatted about this in our pre-talk, and I thought, what would you say are the best areas or even verticals within Canada to invest in right now? Where should our talent be considering?
Yeah, good question. I think I have a few slides. So Terry, I'm not sure if you can share. I've got 3 rapid ones, and it will cover some of the fields that we're definitely not ashamed of bragging. The first one is the video game cluster. 20 years ago, and I happened to be at the Ministry of Finance at that time when it was put together, there was a very aggressive tax credit that was set up by government, which essentially reimburses about 37% of the salaries of the workers in that field. And on that slide, you have a quick snapshot of the video game businesses that landed in Montreal and in Quebec, and created a great cluster, more than 15,000 employees alone in that video game cluster. So definitely something interesting. Now, the next one is the AI cluster, driven by great talent and great universities presence in Montreal. The AI cluster, AI that we didn't talk about 5 years ago. AI was not on everybody's lips. We've realized that we had great researchers and a great talent pool, and talent attracts talent, and organizations attracts other organizations. And you see those big names that we've lured in Quebec. And again, it's just because of the talent pool we have here. And you see that, for example, Microsoft or Facebook that came in 2017, they decided to come back even harder a year later. So, and that's still ongoing. And the last one, which is again more linked to the discussion, is data centers. And as I've mentioned, 44,000 megawatts of renewable energy. As after the pandemic, every single country is trying to green their economy. It applies to data centers, as you can tell, but it also applies to all other sectors. And one of them that you will see and hear more about is the battery. Electrification of transport is something, because of that great energy story we have in Quebec, that will hopefully lure big players in the battery fields. But again, that would not be possible if we didn't have fiber and if we didn't have space. And there's lots of space still available in Quebec and in Canada in general. It's a huge country. And also the climate in data centers. We're sometimes people complain because it's cold, but in the data center cluster, it's definitely an advantage. So these are just a quick snapshot of some of the fields we're good in, and that all have the common denominator of great talent in the city and in the state and in Canada.
Yeah, I love this. I love the slide. The logos there. Some of the top logos for sure in the data center marketplace. Equinix actually now replacing that Bell logo since their October announcement that they acquired Bell's data centers in Canada. So another good reason and justification why Canada, in its clean, reliable, and immense capacity for energy, is really, and great fiber, is really driving data centers to take a second look into the Canadian marketplace. Okay, so
We did have, I saw a question, Jamie, on the chat about French as a must-have language skill. And it resonated with me just so much as we were chatting about it prior to this, which is, in my experience, definitively not. I was relaying to Jamie and Hubert, I've taken 2 years of high school French, which is just enough to be absolutely horrific at it. And I was praised by them for making it an attempt, but it's a non-issue at all. I've never had that be a dynamic. We've worked in every city in Canada as an American. I said this, I know it's very different cultures. I want to be totally respectful of that. I find it incredibly easy to do business there. I've never once felt like that I'm missing things or it's inhibiting our ability to do business because there is a communication gap. And it's never really required extra work or extra effort, often the contrary. So I wouldn't, whatever worry there is about that, I'd take that out of play.
That's a great question. I'm so glad you guys are adding your questions in the Q&A and chat box, as we definitely want to get to them in our roundtable section now that we're in. And Hubert, I'm sure you have another note here too.
Yeah, on the language, I mean, definitely, I mean, Quebec is a French-speaking state, but you should consider Quebec as your entry door to Europe. And what we tell Europeans that want to attack the North American market, we tell them that Quebec is sort of North America for beginners. You know, it looks like the United States, smells like the United States, but it's very French and very European. And on the other side, American companies that want to attack the European market, well, we tell them, you know, come to Europe without jet lag, because this is what Quebec is all about. And for your knowledge, Quebec there's more people that speak English in Montreal than in Vancouver, as ironic as that might be. And we're probably the most trilingual state in Canada because of lots of immigration and very multi-ethnic, and hence companies that have a very international scope will find it very interesting to be here for the language aspects of our talent.
It's funny, Hubert, our companies, you know, the majority of our portfolio is based in the United States. They all want to go to Europe. Great, we're going to, you know, we'll go to the UK first. And it's so interesting, the conversation, like just right up north, it's a lot easier to do business and it's the same exact size GDP. And people miss that.
The same time zone.
And which is a huge factor.
Almost.
Huge factor. So I always find that. So our companies that talk about doing it, we always say, you know, start in Canada. It's a great way to learn and figure out how you're going to do it. And it's often good to do it from there, to your point. If you have a Canadian office, those are the first people that will often go to Europe if you're going to send people over.
And I love this next question we have in from Benjamin here. Do Canadian immigration policies provide an advantage to the high-tech industry? And I feel like we've been chatting about this, Hubert. Maybe you want to give a little bit more, more color.
About those 14 days, I mean, it's not for every job, and it's not in every sector, but definitely for the high tech, we know it's a field where it's difficult, not only in North America but everywhere. So if we get talent that come in from abroad in that particular field, that's where you get the 14 days kicker and accelerator. So yes, I would say it's definitely done for the high tech industry in particular.
You know, on the flip side, Bob, maybe you can kick us off here. How can a company looking to invest in Canada make sure that they've got the right partner for market entry? Are there any red flags that we should be looking out for?
Well, I think, I mean, look, we're venture capitalist growth equity firm. We invest in software companies, but it's the same family. We're making a significant investment in these businesses, no different than you're going to open an office or put a big division there. I think it's similar decision making. You know, at this point, Jamie, I think it's so well trod that you just do the work. I mean, the amount of businesses that have done this and, you know, had great experiences, you can go get the references. You can do the work. This isn't like you're the first company or this is, you know, controversial. When we do diligence on an investment in Canada, it's the exact same diligence we do here in the United States. There's nothing different. Maybe that wasn't the case 20 years ago. But today it certainly is. And I would think the same way. The only thing I would, my experience has taught me is don't dabble, right? Two people on an island, or 20, 10 people, depends on the size of your organization and the relative, things. You don't want to dabble, you want to commit, right? You get a good leader, you get that person, the talent they need, you make it a full thing. You don't just have one area. So you have a full complement of whatever the functional needs of your business would be, and you commit. And generally, that's where people can make mistakes.
Yeah.
They take one specific functional person who's an expert in an area, and you sort of try and do just that, versus making sure you've got great general management, you've done the work, you've got a view, and it'd be just the same as if you were doing it in the States. But I don't think it's any different than any other business decision at this point. You can do the work. There's plenty of data. There's lots of experience. There's lots of references. I don't know what you say, Hubert, but I think it's pretty mature at this point.
Yeah, and 20 years ago, there was about 800 organizations like ours working on FDI, trying to attract companies to invest in their countries. Today, there's 4,000 of them. So there is out there, and in Quebec and in Canada and the United States, great agencies that are there to support you in your project and to help you secure the investment. And most of them offer free services to set up. So you should abuse those services, and that's what we tell our people, is that these services are free. We have access in high levels of government. We can do work permits, environmental audits, help you identify the real estate you need. So really look at the fundamentals. Think about cost advantages, and there is by the way, a 25% cost advantage in terms of FX just between the United States and Quebec. That's something we forget, but there's still that advantage. And then work with the local organizations that are there to support you.
And that's amazing. We don't hear free that much as Americans, I feel like. So really, you offer these services to help American companies.
Yeah, well, they're not free because we pay income tax, and that's how we get paid. But services are most anyway in Canada for sure. All those services are completely free. So again, it's an advantage we offer.
And Hubert, in your opening, you made mention to free trade agreements with U.S., Mexico, Europe, Asia Pac. How do you see opportunities coming out of recent efforts by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden to normalize trade relations? And what's the political climate a little bit right now for you?
I think that the relationship with Canada and the US is very important for Canada, and we look very closely at those relationships. And honestly, historically, Democrats are more protectionist than the Republicans. But then I think that with Mr. Biden, we have perhaps a government that we can more predict what's going to happen, and that makes a big difference. And so the relationships we care the most about are the ones with the states, because that's where the trade is happening. So it's between the state of New York and Quebec, the state of Vermont and Quebec. So this is where we try to cultivate as much our relationships. 70% of all the Quebec's export, there are about 200 billion, go to the United States. So for us, the United States is a very important partner, and we will cherish this relationship as long as we can. And the renegotiation of the free trade is a great example of that. And then obviously, as I've mentioned, Quebec and Canada is such a small economy that we are strong believers in free trade, and we want our companies to have access to those markets. And so we're always going to be willing to sit down and discuss and negotiate.
And Bob, you've been feeling that.
Yeah, I mean, there's big parts of GDP that I'm not qualified to speak of, particularly materials, but as a software investor, a technology investor, it's a non-issue. I mean, I can't think of the last time I ever discussed Canadian regulatory issues as it related to an investment or a company of ours, or or selling goods back and forth. So that's exactly how it should be. Hubert knows a lot more about those things, but at a practical level, for someone doing business there, it's perfect. And I realize in other hard materials it's different. But I do think the other comment I would make is, from a tone perspective, not to get into politics at all, but there's no reason the country shouldn't be incredible allies. And I referred to this earlier. I always feel welcome. I've never had any sense of not being, like I'm working with trusted partners. Like there's a lot in common, and I think I know a lot of Canadians have been to the United States, and not as many U.S. folks have been to Canada, just from a percentage basis. Everybody would benefit from that. I think there's a close kinship, and there always should be.
And even, reading some of the headlines this week, as recent as Monday, I have a headline here in Montreal News from CTV News, where essentially you guys are in the final stages of delivery, this provincial and federal government saying all of Quebec will have high-speed internet by September 2022, which is an awesome gift, right? For entrepreneurial companies looking to expand north, as well as talking about your data center marketplace that's attracted to Canada right now, that access to connectivity. So that kind of leads me to my
Hey, Jamie, while you're prepping on that, the one thing, Hubert, you mentioned earlier, and I forgot to reference it. Almost all of our companies, and our average company is an $80 million software business. But when we invest, they could be 10, 20, or 30 million. Almost all of them have Canadian data center operations for regulatory and data privacy reasons. Not, it's not a cost issue. It's just, if they want to do business in Europe and they want to do business in Canada, it's a great place to do it from. And I think almost 100% of them have it. So it's almost a no-brainer if you're going to go down the data privacy route to house things there.
Absolutely, it's a no-brainer, and then we are very well in sync with being making sure that companies that want to host their data here or elsewhere don't have issues with that regard. So I'm not an expert in data privacy. I'm pretty sure on the line there are people with that expertise. And on the internet side, Jamie, just to touch a little bit on that. Yeah, it's been a challenge getting everybody hooked up on the internet, but it's definitely an engagement that this government has, and so hopefully by the end of 2022, even in the most remote areas, and some of them are very, very, very remote, this is the agenda they've been having their eyes on. So far so good, and everything is in line to reach that objective.
And we have, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, even Calgary now, all emerging hotspots for data center providers who are really actively trying to meet demands for being that meeting point, that meeting place between cloud providers and end users. Particularly as we go to the edge, we want to get closer to our end user eyeballs. Why is Canada becoming this hotspot for cloud and other types of service providers?
Do you want to start, Bob, or?
Yeah, sure. I think it all comes back to talent, right? The country is phenomenal talent. There is some cost advantage to Hubert's earlier comments, but I don't think it's that as much. I think it's more there's great talent. You've got very consistent business practices. It's easy, and it's a natural thing. I mean, relative to going to Europe, it's so much easier to execute on. So I think it's just a natural growth as the U.S. has matured in these areas. That same maturation's happening in Canada. You mentioned Calgary. We have a portfolio company, Benevity, which is, I invested 6 years ago. It was a $5 million business. It's 20 plus times bigger than that now, and it's coming up on 1,000 employees from 50, all right there in Calgary, and we will keep building it. And there's great talent. There's no reason to change that. And I think that once that happens a couple times, then people start realizing it's possible. and they stop moving companies out too early. So if you have a couple, canaries, a couple companies that go through and do it and prove that it's possible, all of a sudden, ambitions get bigger, and whether somebody's moving a big division or growing a big company, they get more confident they can do it, based on the success of folks prior. And I just think there's been a lot of success.
In terms of data center, something I didn't mention earlier is that when you compare cost of doing business in Quebec or in Montreal in particular with 20 same size similar cities across North America, it's in Quebec that it's the cheapest, or the less expensive, should I say. Obviously, that's related to FX. That gives us an advantage, but also energy costs. I did mention that our energy was green and reliable, but you can get hydro here at 4 cents a megawatt. That is probably the lowest price in North America for sure. And so when you know how much energy data centers need, it's really for us a great advantage. And our job, and I know there's Benoit Larouche who represents Investissement Québec in New York. Our job is to put forward those advantages. And when you go back to the slides I've showed, these companies have been answering to the pitch, and they've been saying, "Wow, okay, this is real." And then they come in and they establish, and they help attract other big players. So video games, the few early adopters came in, everybody followed. AI, the Facebook and the Microsoft moved in, everybody started moving in. Same thing with data centers. So if it was just one or two companies, you could say, well, maybe you were lucky. But when you get 80% of the big players coming in, that means that you really have an advantage. And this is what we're pushing. And so far we're doing great, I think.
Are there any markets in Canada that are prime for opportunity or edging towards even becoming saturated?
It's funny you've asked this question about blockchain in the chat.
Yeah.
So far, I mean, there are no restrictions right now on energy. As a matter of fact, we're strongly negotiating with the New York State to sell some of that hydro to New York. But we will be at some point determining what do we want to do with that hydro? Do we want to sell it? Do we want to clean or decarbonate our economy first, and after that help other countries decarbonate? Those are some of the questions we'll need to ask eventually. But at this point of time, that's not really on the agenda. What are we going to do with hydrogen, for example? If you want to do hydrogen, you'll need a lot of hydro, and for those reasons, a lot of people are looking into Quebec. So eventually, I think we'll have to take decisions on where do we want to allocate those megawatts, and what type of impact do we want on our economy. But that's not there yet.
Interesting. Bob, what are you seeing on your end? Any verticals?
Yeah, it's early on. Often you get concentrations of talent in a specific area. And Hubert mentioned a bunch of great ones: FX, virtual visual effects, AI, very technical skill sets, and having those folks around each other's highly effective. Often that can be a sign of an early market too. And our experience has been, at this point, software is in all parts of the economy. There's if you have a business process that isn't being automated in your business, I suspect it will be soon. It's a bigger and bigger percent of everyone's OpEx, and it will be for probably ever. And really, for us, at the point we're coming into companies, it's less soothsaying about markets and much more the actual performance of the business. And I think that's a sign of market maturity. So in Canada, we have, I'll start west east in Vancouver. We have a company that helps small law firms automate their business and run payroll and processing. We have a company I mentioned in Calgary that does corporate social responsibility, enable giving, employee giving, grants, volunteer efforts. We have a company in Toronto. It's by far the highest market share, probably the most valuable private software company in Canada, that helps automate nursing homes and skilled care facilities. So who's running what things at what shift? How are the patients being cared for? Incredibly important during the pandemic. Those are completely different things. I mean, they have nothing in common other than great software helping automate an under-automated business process. They also have nothing to do with those geographies. Why are those three things in those geographies? I mean, there's no natural reason why they're there. And so I think from an investment perspective, for financial sponsors, financial investors like ourselves, it's really just at this point, there's great companies being built in all different areas, and go do the work, and they can be successful despite there not being necessarily a natural reason that they're based there. But I think there's plenty of data points to prove that out.
Yeah. And it's funny, I'm just looking too from our comments here in the chat and Q&A boxes. Perry Eddy mentioning Edmonton as a wonderful place for highly trained workforce and diverse culture, and noting that the city is one of the 3 technology hubs that comprise a pan-Canadian AI strategy. Again, talking software enablement for better business. Edmonton Global. He also, I feel like this is a great shout out. Thank you, Perry. EdmontonGlobal.ca can be of assistance for those looking to grow in Edmonton. Do you have, Bob, anyone in your portfolio in the Edmonton area? Not to put you on the spot.
We've got Calgary for sure. We looked at businesses in Edmonton. We've never made an investment to date, but it just takes one.
Right.
It turns out. Our first one in Canada, and 15 later, and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars later, that's how it gets started. So, and I think that's probably relevant, for everyone listening. It's not that risky of a first move. So, if we were assessing a business in Edmonton, that'd be just like if it was based in Indianapolis. I don't think there's any difference.
In Hubert, when we talk Invest Quebec, in your experience, what is the top issue Invest Quebec has helped solve for companies that wanted to get into Quebec?
There are various, but we feel that we're troubleshooters. So every project gets a different type of hurdle, and our role is to help jump over those hurdles. So depending on the sector, sometimes it can be access to land, sometimes it's transport issues, sometimes it's port authority. So depending on what type of business you're in, then you'll face, obviously, like in every jurisdiction, you'll face some not hurdles, but maybe issues that you need to cope with. And our role, and we're about almost 100 working on FDI and export, based in Quebec. So we're there to facilitate those issues or hurdles if you come across them. So I would say that the most difficult one we have is making sure that Quebec is on the map, because most of companies from Europe that are looking into FDI, their reaction is, let's look into New York, let's look into Chicago, and so we're there pushing and saying, hey, no, you have to look into Montreal or look into other cities in Quebec. And as a matter of fact, if we are in the final short list for foreign direct investment from Europe or Asia against other American cities, if we're in that short list, 60% of the time we'll win. So our goal for us is to make sure that we are way up there in public knowledge for a great destination for FDI. And I'm pretty sure, and I saw our friends from Edmonton Global, I'm pretty sure it's the same for them. So once we have a chance to pitch, we can convert, but the difficulty is the chance to pitch. So that's what we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully this is a good platform there. And actually that brings me to a question from Serge Farman in our Q&A box. What are some of the programs in Quebec that can help companies grow their distribution into the US and rest of the world?
Did you mention distribution?
Yes, into US and rest of the world. I'm not sure if if you
Yeah,
know any
well, as
programs.
I've mentioned, in terms of programs, I mean, there's all kinds of programs, and one of the most important one and most aggressive one is the R&D tax credits that is very aggressive in Quebec and in Canada in general. In terms of borders and tax and tariffs, and obviously because of free trade, in terms of transport, there isn't any issues. Um, 10 years ago, there was only 40 direct links between Montreal and international destinations. There's over 92 today. So transport-wise, lots, almost 8 deep sea ports in Quebec. So not an issue to get your products out. Montreal is considered a great hub as well, with trains into the United States and Northeast. So really, from a geographical point of view, actually, when you take a look at Europe, the first point you touch coming from Europe is Quebec, so or Newfoundland. But so really, from a transport and a logistic hub, I think we're very fortunate.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that mention too of the transport aspects here. And hopefully our border with pandemic will be open sooner than later, getting us right back into the swing of things as well. And Bob, in terms of any programs that you've been benefiting from to get your companies to grow within Quebec and outside of?
Yeah, Hubert mentioned the R&D tax credits has been a wonderful program. I suspect it would be viewed as a success from the government's perspective, but it's certainly been a success from the company's perspective. I mean, I'm not as close to the rules anymore, but it really helps young companies, and it's tailored towards them, and it phases out. But it's a great way, especially early on when there was less capital available. So there was perhaps less seed capital and less angel capital available for these growing companies, and it was a wonderful way to do that. And it also drives accountability, because the entrepreneur, the person, has to ante up as well, right? This isn't just totally free money; it's all pro rata. And so I thought it was a wonderful program. I suspect almost all of our companies that were based in Canada took part in it along their journey, and we hope they all phase out of it and get big enough that it's no longer relevant. But I think, Hubert, would be viewed as a success from the government's perspective as well.
Yeah, this is a government, and it's historically in Quebec very aggressive on tax credits. So there's a tax credit on e-commerce, for example, that reimburses up to 25,000 of the salary of an employee. It's almost 40,000 in video games. So the way this government thinks is that since corporate tax is very low, they get it back from personal taxation, and so their objective is to create as much employment as possible, and so they're aggressive on job creation, and then they get paid back through personal income tax. So for organizations, there's a former prime minister that used to say that an organization that paid income tax or that paid corporate tax in Quebec should change accountant. So that gives you an idea of the mentality here about corporate tax.
That's funny.
And he was someone who studied at London School of Economics, so it's probably very serious thought.
I have a question here on my screen that was really two questions actually that talk in terms of telco perspectives. I see Robin Constantine is a guest here. Robin, not to put you on the spot, my friend, but to hear from the BCE Global perspective on available telco services, etc. This question and data sovereignty. I'm wondering if I could bring you in. Hey, Robin, I'm sorry to bring you in, hook you in here, but thank you for doing so, being here, part of our discussion today. Question from the audience that I thought you would be really great to answer. What's the difference about providing telco services to end users in Canada than in the US?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be here. So I don't think there's a big difference between, providing services either in the US or in Canada. I think what we do, and complementing on what Hubert and Bob have said, we basically are the bridge. Think about it this way: they're actually the bridge to communicate those the folks that are now settling into Canada in regards to net new business and so forth, and any of these cities that we've mentioned from the west all the way down to Montreal. So we, through just basically what I would call generational investments that Bell has done, Bell Canada has done over the last year, right, close to over $20 billion worth of infrastructure investment in either fiber, wireless, and so forth. Applying all these businesses, applying all of those data centers that Hubert was talking about, it is critical. So, again, we're the bridge. Without the communication, it almost goes back to Hubert's point around transport. If there's great transport, you can do business. There's great hydro, you can do business. Well, telecom is really that other third piece of the puzzle of how important that is to be able to, enable the businesses that are settling into Canada and tying it to that North American and truthfully that worldwide market and where Canada is playing. So I would say that's kind of the answer to that question. It's very similar. It's just what we do here is enabling those investments that Bob is doing with his companies and as well that you guys.
And for companies that American companies that might not already know, can you tell us a little bit? Can you talk overarching thoughts about Canadian data sovereignty, because I think it's a really
it's a super hot topic, and Hubert touched about it previously. Give you an example just rapidly. A lot of those large cloud providers, I always say, discovered Canada about 3 to 5 years ago, and actually made Montreal the first region in Canada. And we soon saw that that attracted tons of other companies, as Hubert has mentioned. But the important piece here is how you actually transport those bits of information that's really sovereign in terms of where it resides. And from that point of view, Bell, from what we saw, is we actually created an all Canadian, what we call a triversity network across the country. So basically, your bits and bytes, if you require that European company settling in Montreal that wants to move its data back and forth between Vancouver and let's say Montreal, those bits and bytes, that information never crosses the US. So again, that is how Bell has adapted to that market because of the importance of sovereignty of data. And we've seen it, tons of it from our US customers coming into Canada, but a ton as well as European companies are coming into our country saying, listen, it's super important that our data stays secure.
Bob, are you seeing that as well from your
I was going to say, Robin, most of what I've seen is what you described, the latter. It's if an American company is going to Europe or European things coming here, how do you create almost a US no-touch data environment? I don't understand the law specifically enough. It's frustrating to see it all, but practically speaking, it's a real issue for the businesses.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
And that if they want to execute, they need to be able to do it. And the answer for our companies is universally been, we're going up on an AWS or a Google or Microsoft Azure cloud in Canada where it doesn't touch here.
Exactly. Yeah, and we've seen that quite a bit. Again, the good news is that working very closely with some of these big cloud companies, we've soon understood that it was really important for us to create that infrastructure to support those businesses so they could have also success within the Canadian borders.
Yeah, there's nothing more important than that connectivity infrastructure, not just for the data centers, but for the software companies, the AI coders, just all enterprises. It's underlying necessity. It's like breathing air these days.
Yeah.
The one interesting thing on that, Jamie, your point, Robin, you probably see this even better than we do, is the data proliferation. I mean, when you look at these charts, it's just staggering. I mean, they're not going like this. They're going like this.
Yeah.
And that used to be a little bit of a phenomenon of just businesses, and then it became a consumer phenomenon. especially with the creation of video, right? Just the data sets, just massive. And now it's becoming back a business phenomenon. I mean, companies now are just putting off so much data. And it's a real, I think it's a huge issue. It's a huge thing. I don't know how useful it all is, but there's no signs of abating.
No, you're right. I mean, everybody's keeping an eye on just volumes of data that's going around. Could actually see this as exponential. But what's also important, as you just pointed out, is that as you get into these data centers, the uptime, right, of that network needs to be there. So again, it's nice to have a data center and has all this power and if it's working, but if the connectivity is not in there, so some of our customers, we're going in 3 different ways into those data centers, and we're going out 4 ways out of a certain market, just to show you that diversity and wealth of the network, just to support those types of customers that are sitting into what you were just mentioning, the AWS, the Azure, and Google clouds that are all kind of sitting within the Canadian space. So it's critical to have the right enablement through the right network provider for sure.
And the right diversity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those data trends are not going anywhere but up. I just sitting here and prior to this webinar and thinking, oh no, how am I going to have my at-home network, be stable enough for this webinar? And my husband, the tech maestro in my household, he's like, how about you shut off some of those baby monitors that you have on every single room, feeding high definition of my baby sleeping. And I'm like, all right, that could be a drain. I could see how that, but I mean, this is the reality of, having 12 devices in every room of your house at this point.
Yeah. And obviously we've seen, unfortunately, we've seen it through the pandemic, right? But that demand from data, which used to be central in a building, now basically just spread out as an octopus everywhere, and now to the home. And we've seen it from a service provider perspective, the requirements that has brought onto the network. And I think to your question, Jamie, before around the investment of the federal and provincial government in Quebec, I think it's about $1 billion or just shy of $1 billion that will be invested to hit almost every household in the province of Quebec of over 8 million people. Obviously Bell is not the only service provider doing that, but that is a major job, and it also recognizes the need for connectivity, right? To be able to do what we're kind of doing today, which is all from different parts of the world and from our homes mostly.
And to Hubert's point, the government's real commitment here to making sure there's enough available infrastructure to welcome all these new companies.
Exactly. Super important.
All right, gentlemen, I know we're getting close. Any final thoughts? Hot round here. Hubert, if you were to take one note, one last goodbye sentence, what are your thoughts for what's coming ahead in 2021, 2022?
I guess my final phrase would be give us a shot, and you'll be impressed by what we can deliver and the services we can provide you. And Quebec is a great place to do business, and I think we've demonstrated that. And if you have a project and you're considering Canada or even Europe, then we can be definitely a great destination. And that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And green and sustainable too. I mean,
green and sustainable. That's right.
Being reliable. It's really it's a vision for us here.
It's funny you say this, Robin, but most of the political elites that were trained here in the 1960s were trained in Europe, and in the 1960s, half of the 60s, we had to take a decision between either nuclear or hydro. And most of Europe was nuclear, but we chose hydro, and this is today probably was going to help us relaunch and decarbonate our economy.
That's fascinating. Interesting.
That is tomorrow. Bob, what are your thoughts?
No, the only thing I think we were chatting about this, before we came on. Obviously, it's been a horrendous pandemic and affected all of us in so many different ways. But I do think, the virtual nature of how work's being conducted now is, it likely won't continue to the extent this is. At some point we'll all be together again, but some element of it is for sure here to stay. And I think that's going to have a really positive impact for Canada. I mean, it's just, as folks are making business decisions and thinking about where they're going to do things and how, you just have a broader expanse because of what everyone's been through, and realize we can be productive in different environments, different groups, different areas, and still stay connected. So I think that's going to be a natural positive. It'll be very interesting to see. I hate all this new competition we have in Canada. It was nice when it was just us, but it's great for the entrepreneurs. It's great for the country. It's great for the companies. So that matters a lot more. But it's really positive to see. So I look forward to being able to come back, and obviously thank you for hosting us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Hubert. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Robin, for coming in. We're really honored to have the guest expert from BCE Global. And thank you to our attendees for all of your questions. We had a wonderful Q&A box, very active. If we didn't have time to get to your question, we will be following up with you after the event to make sure your question is addressed. Again, thank you to our featured panelists, Hubert Boudec, President of Invest Quebec, and Bob Nye, who is the General Partner of JMI Equity. And thank you, attendees, for joining us. Of course, thank you again, BCE Global USA, for hosting this great discussion. Keep an eye out for the registration link for our April virtual roundtable, where we will explore the topic of unlocking opportunities in Canada for cloud companies. So stay tuned for more, and from now until then, happy networking.